All right, thank you for being here with me today. This is Eric Freels. He is the wildlife biologist in Grand Junction with the U.S. Forest Service. Why wildlife? What led you to a career in wildlife?
Oh, wow. Starting off with the heavy ones. I guess it always came from my passion for being outdoors and for all things natural. And then as I went to school, and I knew that was kind of my calling, I didn't know what exactly where that would lead me, and I didn't know how difficult it was to get a wildlife job at that time, which is it's very difficult, by the way. And so, really what it came down to is when I started becoming more educated about the different issues that wildlife faced. And most importantly, the fact that, we're going through the sixth great extinction of the planet's history, and this one's caused by man, basically, the man-made extinction. The weight of that definitely pulled towards me and was like, how can you make a difference in that? And so, so really, I think everyone that starts in this field starts out from a pretty idealistic point of view. And how do you, and it could be something as general as I want to help endangered species, which we all kind of want to, right? And so, but then, once you get into wildlife, you're like, well, there's so many different ways to do that. How do I actually do that on the ground? And really my career track took me to working with public lands and land management agencies, which, in this country at least, is a really good way, I feel, to help wildlife, because you do have a direct say and you do have a direct connection to how that land's managed.
What led you into a career with the Forest Service? And then what's a day in the life of a wildlife biologist at the Forest Service?
So basically, it started out as a seasonal position, and I think that's with most people with the government agencies. They start out as a seasonal and then do that for anywhere from 2 to 10 years until they get a permanent job. I did seasonal work for up to
give up.
Yeah, or give up, and that's why I was saying earlier. It's a difficult job, and it's basically a battle of persistence for anyone that's really serious about this, because I did it for 6 years, and moved all over the country doing it, and then. So that introduced me to the Forest Service. At the time, I didn't understand. I just thought it was awesome, the Forest Service, and knowing the complexity and the multiple use part of managing that land was something that takes years to learn about. I'm still learning about. At this level in my career, there's a lot of administrative stuff going on. I hire seasonals. There's a lot of budgeting that goes on, but there's also NEPA that goes on as a federal agency. NEPA is what we do for everything. And so there's a fair amount of that, and that's fine. That's kind of what I like about my job with public lands, is that, when you do the NEPA, that's your opportunity to advocate for your resource, which is wildlife, and make sure if that action is going to happen regardless, of your input, you might as well have positive input for various wildlife species. And so that's where you can get creative. There's a lot of, I get out in the field a couple times a week for sure. I have great flexibility with my job, doing snow surveys right now in the wintertime on snowmobiles, cool. Getting ready for the field season. But, that's the thing that's also great about this job. Every day is different. You never know, so you have to be flexible and adaptable to the changes and to, put out fires one day, and some days are slower, but it's a typical day.
So you have worked for the BLM previously, and so I wanted to know what some of the differences and similarities between the Forest Service and the BLM are, and the way they operate, and in regards to being an employee for the agencies.
Okay. That's a good question, because the differences are subtle unless you're in those agencies. And so from a bigger point of view, the jobs are really similar. We're both land management agencies. We have proposals. We manage for multiple use. As a wildlife biologist, you do NEPA. You try to minimize impacts. Sometimes the land is less forgiving in the BLM because it's usually lower elevation, more arid. You know, it's not like you can go out there and graze like you can on the forest at 10,000 feet, and you can't even tell the cows were there the next summer. You know, it's a little less forgiving, and so it's a little bit more maybe challenging to balance all those multiple uses on the BLM, I think. And the BLM takes care of a lot of the oil and gas leasing in this country. They are responsible for all the oil and gas leasing, and so that's another, you know, here in Gunnison, you guys don't have oil and gas. And so that's, as a biologist here in Gunnison, it's pretty sweet because you don't have to deal with that. But you do have other things like recreation, which is huge here. You know, you have bikers, you have a lot of people that want to use the lands around here. So there's different multiple uses and pressures as far as the differences in the two agencies. You know, we work well with our BLM counterparts. I actually worked on an office. It was a Service First office before I came to Grand Junction, and it was basically the plan for Service First was that the BLM and Forest Service would be managed as basically one agency.
Okay.
And that's how it worked for like 8 years down there. And it was great. It was awesome. So I was technically a BLM employee, but my district was everything up to 14,000 foot mountain on the Forest Service down to 5,000 foot, you know, canyons of the BLM.
That is awesome.
And so it took away that, you know, basically arbitrary boundary between the land agencies, and you could really manage as the landscape. I mean, because the big game, they use, you know, they start on the forest and they end up on the BLM and vice versa. And so it's like, how do you make this work for these species? You know, it can kind of give you that bigger picture way of managing. And so, but, you know, it is the government, there's different agencies, there's different managers involved at those different agencies, and for those reasons it didn't work. But on the ground, it worked awesome, and it was great. And so that's an example of really the differences between the two agencies, to your question, were they were small. The BLM is managed state by state, and where the Forest Service were regional, we have regions. We have 9 regions throughout the country. Region 2 is where we are in Colorado, and that's like a huge area, like Colorado, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Nebraska. So it's a huge amount of forest, and so it's a lot more, you know, it's a lot more bigger picture, and the management's like way more at a 30,000 level foot landscape versus, you know, hey, I can call up the state wildlife lead and ask them something, you know. So that, I think that was a huge plus to the BLM that I appreciated.
Working for these agencies, what do you see their missions to be? And do you think that they were meeting those missions?
The mission statement for those two agencies are very, very similar, almost verbatim. And it's something about managing for multiple resources while preserving for wildlife and all the other natural resources.
Right.
While, you know, and so that was something I kept, you know, it seemed as a BLM biologist that I had to make that fight. That fight was a little harder than it is with the Forest Service, if that's a nice way to say that.
Yeah.
You know, I had to make, and that's why I put it on my whiteboard. It's like, look, here's our mission.
Yeah.
You know, we have an obligation to put a bike trail or a well pad here, but is it really meeting our mission, you know, of multiple resources while providing for these other things? And to me, those other things were wildlife, were primary things. So in theory, to me, the missions are very similar. As they should be for all federal public lands management agencies and multiple use agencies. Because I've always seen myself as a wildlife biologist first, and then I'm either a BLM agency employee or a Forest Service agency or a state employee second. I was never like, I bleed green, I bleed brown, or whatever.
Yeah.
Basically, these agencies and these jobs were the avenue for me to do my job, which is wildlife conservation.